Hello and welcome to Module 1 of the Rapid Scripting API training series. So this module serves as an introduction, and this course in general is aimed at scientific programmers who have a need to interact with Genealogics Clarity LIMS through a programming interface. This introductory module will touch briefly on what the Rapid Scripting API is, as well as the key concepts behind it, which are namely REST and EPP. We'll also look at the API resources that are available to you, one of which is the developer.genealogics.com website, which you should already have access to, as well as a login for some of the restricted parts of the site. And throughout all of the modules that we'll be doing, there will be exercises which are intended for you to play offline and learn at your own speed, and we very much encourage you to complete those exercises rather than just watch the training materials. This is very much a hands-on course. The Rapid Scripting API package is really made up of three components defined on this slide. So, perhaps the most important of which is the online training materials and the documentation. So, the developers.genealogics.com site contains all of the reference documentation that you will need for using the Genealogics API, as well as a whole bunch of other materials which we term the cookbook. So these are small scripts which illustrate concepts and you can use as the base of some of the scripts that you'll be writing yourselves, and so you definitely want to spend some time checking out the cookbook. Another component to this is the ability and the licensing to support what we call sandbox servers. So this might be a test server or a virtual machine which you're going to develop and test scripts against, rather than accessing your production system. And then the third component of this is the help and consulting and support that you can get from Genealogics. So our API has been built on the REST web service architecture and technology. So REST is an acronym for representational state transfer, and at its simplest level you supply a URI similar to the web addresses that you would type into your web browser, and you specify a URI which connects to a resource, and that resource will return a piece of XML which describes all of the data or all of the dependent data that you will need for describing that resource. So it's a stateless interaction, it's relatively easy to understand, and it's self-contained, and essentially the XML is self-describing. So if you haven't played a lot with XML, then this might seem a bit daunting at first, but after just a few hours you'll quickly come to grasp how this works, and you'll be perfectly able and fluent in using this XML to understand the API and to interact with it. In modules 5a and its appendix 5b, we'll spend quite a lot of time talking about something called the EPP, which we'll define here as the external program plugin. And really what this is a bridge between the LIMS interfaces that the lab scientists and other people are using, as well as external systems such as algorithms or programs or scripts that you have about your facility. So it's a way of bridging the two together, and this is something which typically our API users are relying upon quite heavily, so that an action in the LIMS is triggering or evoking a script which is going to carry out a piece of work and optionally give messages back to the technician who is using the interface and return results to that user. So it's a very convenient mechanism for tying any custom business logic that you need to the LIMS and allowing your lab scientists to work in a seamless manner using just a single interface without having to sort of stop what they're doing and switching to a different interface to launch a script or program, etc. The diagram that I have on screen here is one that we'll come back to in pretty much every module, and in as much as possible it's a simplified view of how the LIMS works. So we'll be talking about this in some detail and focused on the various topics, but just looking at the left hand side here, you can see that projects are related to researchers in that a project is owned by a researcher. A project is also the container for samples that are submitted at the beginning of the project, and those samples get turned into artifacts, and then we have the main loop that occurs with artifacts, which involves processes, and this is something that will be covered in some detail in module 4, but we just wanted to introduce this diagram and have you take a look at it here and just check out that it makes sense. We've already touched upon this, but throughout the course and as well as completing the exercises, we're assuring that you have access to developer.genealogics.com and that you've been able to pull this up in your web browser and take a look at all of the excellent material that's there. In addition, you should be able to click on the cookbook links and sections and be able to see the content there. Now, you may be prompted for a username and password. This is a username and password that Genealogics should have provided to you already. If you haven't yet received your username and password to that section of the website, or you need additional ones, then please contact us at support.genealogics.com. Before you proceed on to module 2 of this series, you should probably complete the exercises for this module, which would be to log into the API through your web browser, and you should have already been given information on how to do that. And we'd also like you to spend a bit of time looking at the developer site, in particular the initial sections, and reviewing the key concepts about the developer site. And if you have time, take a look at the REST methods, which are post, put, get and delete. So you should be able to either browse to the pages that you need or search for them. In addition, have a look at some of the post and put examples and review the general concepts that underpin the REST API.